Well, good morning. I am Kris Lafferty. I am representing the Fairhope Library, and I am interviewing this morning Ken McNamara. It is Wednesday, July the 7th, 2021. We're at the Fairhope Library, and this interview is being conducted for the Fairhope Library's Veterans Oral History Collection. Could you please give me your full name, date of birth, and branch of service?
Sure. Good morning, Kris. I'm happy to be doing this. It's taken 50 years, but I think it's going to be just great. I'm Ken McNamara. I was born April 23rd, 1945, still just within the Second World War. And what was the other part?
Your branch of service when you were on active duty.
I was in the U.S. Army, and within that I was in the Army Security Agency.
Were you involved in any war or conflict?
I was. When I went into the service in 1963, Vietnam wasn't even in anybody's vocabulary then, and I went through training in '63, and then I went to Korea for a year and doing that intelligence work within the agency. And then I went to Germany for a year, and then to Vietnam for a year.
A world traveler.
Yeah.
What got you interested in the military?
I was born in New York City, and for people in New York, West Point is a very hallowed place. And I grew up with a World War II father in the Army that would sing praises of West Point as a noble place to attend and have a military career thereafter. And so my sights were always set on the military, and especially going to West Point. And all my courses and curriculum in high school were geared that way. At that time, in order to get into West Point, you needed 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of English, 4 years of languages, and be athletic in sports and all of that. And so I was always geared that way to go there.
When you joined the military, how old were you?
I was 18. To back up a little, in my senior year of high school, my congressman in West Michigan, where we lived then, was Jerry Ford, and he gave me an appointment to the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, and which was not West Point. So at the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. And I decided then that I would go into the military as an enlisted person to try and get an appointment through those ranks. And so I was 18 when I joined.
And then what type you had some training, or what type of job did they assign you to?
Mm-hmm. I scored out very well in the all the entrance stuff, and so I found that I was recruited by the Army Security Agency to go into their outfit, and they did highly classified electronic intelligence gathering worldwide, and they convinced me that would be a good place to be. And so when I went off to Army boot camp, that was my intent to go with them. And I still had my sights set on West Point, and so I was always the best at everything through boot camp, and wound up as the honor trainee for my company of 200 guys and all that stuff, So, but then I was off to Fort Devens for 8 months worth of training in Massachusetts, and then at the completion of that advanced training, which was a number of courses in intelligence collection and analysis, and I became an analyst. And then I started my foreign deployments after that training.
And with these foreign deployments, where did you go?
Well, my first, after I'd been in a total of a year of my 4 years, I went off to Korea for 13 months, and at that location, all of the intelligence gathering was long-range, strategic intelligence gathering. And so from Korea, we were gathering intelligence on China. We in the United States only had 8 armies. China had 34. And so it was, we were able to identify their units, their transmitters, pinpoint them, and would know when they were on maneuvers or going somewhere, which I saw them moving down to jump-off harbors when we were having the Gulf of Tonkin problem back at the start of the Vietnam War that began it. Mm-hmm. So that was that kind of intelligence gathering, but it was all electronic communications interceptions. And then after my Korea tour, I have one funny story. I was expecting at age 20 to leave Korea and go home to my girlfriend, future wife, and fly back. At that time, they were transporting troops back from Korea 2 ways. One, flying, and 2, they were winding down the troop transport program. And sure enough, I got the troop transport coming back. So myself and 3,000 of my closest friends in a Second World War troop transport, stacked, sleeping 5 high.
Wow.
Spent 19 days across the Pacific, from Korea to Japan to Hawaii to the States. And to add insult to injury, I crossed the date line and did the same day over again. So 19 days. But that was how we did things then. In Korea, mail took a month to get to us because things were by boat then. So in 1964, things were a lot different than today. From Korea, I went to Germany and did the same type of electronic communications intercepts and analysis there. But in that case, in southern Germany, in Bavaria, it was against the entire Soviet bloc and all of the various Czech, Polish, and Russian army units then in the mid-60s. And after that, towards the latter part of my first year there, when I still would have had another year left, I could have stayed in Germany, but they came out with a new program where they were loading this kind of intercept equipment into aircraft. And so what I did was found out about it. Instead of doing long-range strategic locations of like I did in China, against China and Russia and all, this was going to be tactical support of ground and bombing operations in Vietnam. And so they solicited volunteers in my particular skill set, my MOS, and I volunteered and I was gone in 2 weeks. And so I went immediately from Germany to Vietnam to Saigon, was assigned to an aircraft crew, and the units that in the Army Security Agency in Vietnam, there were a number of small aircraft, de Havilland Company's Beaver and Otter aircraft, which was just one intercept operator, and then, but they had a new one that they needed me for, which was a large cargo ship, a Caribou, which there's a picture of me in front of it, but it's a twin engine cargo aircraft that's most used for short takeoff and landing situations around the world. And it's an old plane now, but then it was packed with electronic gear and 3 operator positions to do the intercepts. And much of the communications back in the 60s was all Morse code. And so that's what we were intercepting, the Morse code signals. And then the plane would locate the enemy transmitters under the jungle canopy and we could do that in the air, and then we would radio the coordinates to either units that were taking off behind us. We'd be a floating platform for hours picking up these signals and coordinates, and then behind us would come the Huey helicopters and assault forces, or the ground troops would move in, and or the Air Force would send B-52 bombing runs out of Thailand. So all of that was going on as a result of the coordinates that we were gathering against both the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong.
In all these different places where you were traveling and stationed, were you living on base, or how did they? Yeah,
we were always flying in the both in Korea and Germany. We had regular Army barracks. In Vietnam, we were permanently assigned in Saigon, but wherever we needed to fly up to anywhere in the country to support Army, Marine, Air Force operations, we'd jump in the aircraft, fly up to Vung Tau, Phu Bai, Da Nang, wherever it was, and we'd then bunk in with all of the units up there at the airfield, because we'd be at an airfield.
Did you become acquainted with any of the languages in these various places?
I did, which is kind of an interesting story. I took, as a requirement for the military academy, I took 4 years of languages. I took 2 years of French, 2 years of Spanish, and struggled. And I get into the Army Security Agency, and they have a huge need for linguists and speaking worldwide languages. And so they have a battery of tests they give you for language aptitude. Mm-hmm. And I took that test, and they determined I had absolutely no aptitude for languages. And I understood why I struggled with French and Spanish. So yes, I got close to people in Korea, Germany, Vietnam. I even took 2 college courses through the University of Maryland in Germany in High German, which was no use at all in Bavaria. But in any event, and I learned some Vietnamese. But once again, with my lack of aptitude, I constructed sentences where there was a hodgepodge of all of those.
So when you found yourself in Saigon, what were you assigned to? Your unit was?
It was the Caribou aircraft, and that and the crew and the maintenance people for it. We were the family that traveled together and did all the missions together. So we had 4 pilots and 4 or 5 of the radio operators and myself and a crew chief, and but our life was that aircraft, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, flying.
So your daily routine, you were always flying?
Yes.
Yeah, always flying.
Always supporting missions. And there would be times, because of weather and monsoons and that kind of stuff, we didn't fly, but basically that was our task.
What, do you have any memories of these remote bases that you were?
Yes. Some were very primitive. The showers were 50-gallon drums of water with a shower head. The troops always found ways to enjoy themselves, and some had pet monkeys from the jungle, and it was Vietnam used to have, back in the early centuries, used to have an imperial city. Vietnam was unified in the middle of the country in the city of Hue. Mm-hmm. And Hue had an imperial palace where the emperor would rule all of Vietnam before it became demilitarized north and south. And in 1966, when I got to Vietnam, I had an opportunity in Da Nang to leave the base and go to the Imperial City and take pictures of the throne room and all of the grounds and all of that. And I still have those pictures. But later on, I think after the Tet Offensive in '68, the Viet Cong took over that palace, and the only way to get them out was the U.S. basically obliterated it and destroyed it. And so I have pictures of something that no longer exists. And of course, the Imperial City would not be celebrated in the communist regime today. So that's one memory I have. Another is that we used to fly into dirt airstrips, and there'd be a lot of other Army aircraft things going on, and there was a huge effort then to defoliate a lot of the jungles and everything in Vietnam. They would move villagers away from their villages into compounds and then defoliate everything else with the intent to have free fire zones where they could see enemy movements and then be able to shoot and bomb them from the air. And so at our airfields where we were parked and waiting and all that, there were C-130 spraying aircraft with big sprayers and loading up Agent Orange, Agent Purple, and a lot of the defoliant different things they were using. And there were a lot of 50-gallon drums just laying everywhere, some open, spilling, so forth. But it was just something that was being used without regard to contamination. And nor when we were spraying it was there much regard for who was underneath the jungle canopy, including our own troops, as well as livestock and Vietnamese villagers. And so it was one of these things that I just noted at the time. 50 years later, I was diagnosed with 2 different forms of cancer, which have been successfully treated, but those cancers have been determined by the Veterans Administration to be directly caused by Agent Orange contamination. Yes. And that was going on in my world as well as in a lot of GI's world, and so that's one of the ramifications we have today. A second memory is we were supporting a marine operation up north by the DMZ, and just over the DMZ is North Vietnam, and we were flying up just over North Vietnam, 10 miles or so, locating enemy in the south, and a anti-aircraft gun from North Vietnam and what we call the Quad 50 caliber machine gun, which are 4 calibers, and they're all tracked together, but 4 machine guns, and the anti-aircraft opened up on us, and I still remember seeing tracers between the wingtip and myself. Wow. And then as the pilot kicked over to get us out of there, the tail of our aircraft was shot off, which meant that in order to crash land or emergency land, the only way he could steer the aircraft was to change the pitch in the props, which is old school and very commendable. So no one was hurt. If you're going to have a war story, it's a good one. And our aircraft, though, was damaged. This was within about a month of my 4-year enlistment being up, and so that kind of ended my Vietnam and my last service.
How did you stay in contact with people at home during these years?
It was almost always letters. There was really no communication, no telephones, no satellite phones then, no internet and emails, so it was all letters. And 4 years earlier, when I was in Korea, it was all sent by boat, the letters. So it took a month to get home and a month to get an answer back. In Vietnam, things were flying in and out, but of course, at the height of it, there were 500,000 troops there. So we're talking a massive operation. Sure. I remember being in Vung Tau, which was flying out of there, in which it's a seaport in which all of our ships were coming in to supply 500,000 troops, and you could sit on the beach and look over the horizon, and that's all you saw was ships. It looks like a flotilla out of the Second World War, of all cargo ships bringing in all that's needed to keep 500,000 people on the ground. So it was
plus the mail. It
was massive,
So did they bring you good food, or were you doing MREs?
We only used MREs when we were up on the plane for 6 hours, but I was never one to complain about military food. I just thought they did as good as they can. It was. I kind of like chipped beef on toast.
All right. So do I. How about laundry? I mean, was there a place where you could get laundry done? Or
in Korea, we had houseboys in our barracks. In Germany, I did my own for the most part. There were German-run cleaners on base for dress uniforms. In Vietnam, surprisingly, we had houseboys. We couldn't tell the VC from civilians, but somehow the military felt comfortable with having houseboys and housegirls that would wash clothes and all that stuff. So that was done.
So you're about ready to depart Vietnam at this point and come home, and
yeah, my 4 years was over, and it was one of those things that I had already made a decision that I wasn't going to make it a career. I realized for the officers over me in the Army Security Agency, as the majors and captains, as they talked about their careers and how much they'd been separated from their families with hardship tours in Korea and Turkey and so forth, all performing this intercept mission, I realized that's not what I wanted. And even though I still just only had a girlfriend, I realized that wasn't for me. And so I was discharged in August of 1967 in Oakland. And bear in mind that I had been foreign for 3 years during what has started to be called the turbulent 60s, the 60s of Haight-Ashbury and dropout and tune-in was going on with the drug culture. The civil rights activism was starting to grow, and the country was in real turmoil over all the anti-war demonstrations going on. So when I was discharged in August of '67, and we were leaving the Army base on buses to go to commercial flights at the airport to go home, as the bus left the terminal, the base, we were greeted by all the anti-war protesters with signs and shouting angrily at us. And that was my first welcome home. Wow. And then we all went to the airport to grab our flights home, and we were all in civvies because they didn't want us targeted at the airport and so forth.
Sure.
So that was our welcome home, and it was a tough time for our nation, and it's the kind of thing that I remember that I didn't understand. I didn't understand why, when I flew home to Grand Rapids, Michigan, Detroit, Watts, other cities were burning. I didn't have that much information coming to me via Stars and Striped newspapers to understand the build up when I was in Korea, Germany, and Vietnam, what was going on in my own country. So that was my homecoming. Within a month of getting out, I was in college as a veteran, and I was dating my future wife then in college, and I found college to be wonderful and a good place to be. There were a number of vets on campus, and we had some camaraderie in that. I remember within a year or two of still in undergraduate school that there was a dedication of an eternal flame on campus for the Vietnam vets that had died, and my congressman, Jerry Ford, that I had interviewed with for the Merchant Marine Academy appointment, was there, and I had to watch the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, pelt him with eggs.
What were you studying?
I was studying sociology and psychology, and thought that was leaning towards a high school teaching, and then I realized after doing my student teaching that I couldn't put up with high school students, and so I picked the next best, which is I went to law school.
All right.
after undergrad, but I double timed through undergrad school in summers and heavy loads, and I was done in 3 years, and then I went off to law school and realized that if I continued on in law school after my first year, I'd become a lawyer. And,
that is the end result, yeah.
And so after 1 year, I changed course and applied for two things. One, I had really learned in the Army that if you're going to be in the military as a career, the Air Force was the best place to be. It was quasi-military, if you will. And so I applied for the Air Force Navigator program to become a navigator, and I also simultaneously applied to become a U.S. Customs Special Agent. And when I was winding up my first year of law school, I had two acceptance letters in my hands, one for the Air Force to go to Lackland Air Force Base to get my bars and go through navigator school, or become a customs agent. And the turning point between the two offers was I went with my wife to get my Air Force Class II flight physical at Sulphurge Air Force Base north of Detroit. And as we drove in the base to go to the hospital for the physical, we went by all the rows of the officers' quarters, and they were all Quonset huts. Captains, majors, colonels living in Quonset huts. And my wife said, "How would you like to be a customs agent?" And that's literally how I did 32 years as a customs agent.
Wow. So the military sort of led you to the customs agency.
It did. When I was I told you how my courses and everything in high school were getting me ready for the academies. I was also very active in Boy Scouting and became a Eagle Scout, and a lot of the core principles that I learned of duty, honor, and country that are so dear, not only to the Scouts, but the military, have kind of framed who I am. And so moving into government service as a federal law enforcement agent was very easy for me. And it all brought together those same kinds of duty to country and service and so forth. So that was important. And the military framed my worldview from all my travels and framed my philosophy of who we are as a nation in the world.
What were your responsibilities as a custom agent?
Well, initially, I spent a lot of time in schools and academies learning all the typical things of conducting investigations, the law, which the law school year really helped, and investigative strategy, undercover work. It was the gamut of things. My first duty assignment was Cleveland, Ohio, so in addition to drug cases there was a lot of fraud cases, a lot of big corporations with headquarters in the state of Ohio. And so I did a lot of fraud work on customs fraud violations, and then wound up within, there was in 1973, there was a merger of U.S. Customs and the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD,
Really?
The unification of their drug functions into one agency called the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. So they took agents from BNDD and the agents that were working predominantly drug cases and merged them into the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I became one of the merged people against my will. And so I did a lot of narcotics work, undercover work, a lot of raids and everything in Cleveland for about 6 to 8 months until there was a position opened up back with the Customs investigative units in Chicago, and I jumped back to Customs, which had been my love, working with Customs. And so I got out of DEA. The position in Chicago was within Internal Affairs. And Internal Affairs is always an organization and every large organization has them, where they're looking for corrupt employees. And so you're never a popular figure with your coworkers, but within the agency. But it's a necessary thing. And I did that for 8 years in Chicago, moving up to the managerial ranks. Then as a senior manager in Chicago, I was transferred to Washington, D.C., was a division director there, and within Internal Affairs, ran a number of national programs. After 3 years in Washington, I was transferred to Houston to be a regional director over the 7 Internal Affairs offices in the Southwest region. So we were performing all the anti-corruption duties, education, training, arrests, and so forth, all the way from McAllen to the California border. All of that customs area fell under me for internal affairs purposes. After 8 years there in Houston, I was transferred back to Washington for 5 years, where I ran the worldwide deep cover operations in customs investigations, and then wound up being with the Office of Investigations. And after my 5 years, I said enough of the high pressure of Washington, and told my boss I wanted out of there. I should tell you that the time in DC was important to me because by then the Vietnam Wall had been built. And so when I needed time to get away from the 12-hour headquarter days and decompress. I just walked down to the wall, and it was a very moving time for me. I then was transferred at my request to Mobile, where my wife's family lived, and I wound up running the U.S. Customs Investigative Office in Mobile for 5 years until I retired. And so I retired in 2002, 20 years ago, from U.S. Customs.
What did you decide to do then, or were you truly retired at that point?
I had a number of friends who, after their customs employment, got involved with the U.S. State Department and the Department of Defense, teaching various courses overseas for the State Department and Defense Department. And the kinds of courses predominantly for us as former customs were dealt with counterterrorism and also instructing foreign officials in how to tighten up their own border security and how to use more sophisticated techniques, how to develop sources, perform investigations, strategies on how to protect their borders. So they convinced me that that's something I should do in retirement. So I wound up retiring when my kids were in middle and high school. So I basically had fun for 4 years being a band parent and being a scoutmaster locally and doing fun things as a retiree. But it reached a point where when we were empty nested, the kids were off to college and my wife was working, that I was at home and everybody was tired of me micromanaging them. So I jumped into teaching foreign. So when I was about 60 years old, I started to join teams of 3 teaching 2-week courses, predominantly in border security and counterterrorism for the State Department all over the world. So I've been to at least 20 countries, and some good, some bad, and it has been really, it's been fun to do that. I got to a lot of places I never would have seen, like Kuala Lumpur and Chiang Mai, Thailand, and Kenya, and I was on safaris, and I was in Jordan and went to Petra, and so a lot of places that were just fun to do, and yet felt very good about the skill sets that I was able to leave behind in my teaching. So I did that for a number of years, and then when Baghdad was taken in the Iraq War, part of the rebuilding of that country was to set up an organization called the Commission of Integrity, which was an organization established in Iraq, required by us in our government of Iraq, to establish this to weed out corruption within the Iraqi government, and so of the existing officials. So they set up this Commission of Integrity and needed investigators with an experience in internal affairs, corruption, to come in, train up Iraqi lawyers to perform investigations and prosecute the cases within the Sharia law boundaries of their own country. And so I accepted a position to work for the embassy in Baghdad, and I spent a year training 100 Iraqi lawyers on how to perform investigations, prepare cases, how to develop witnesses, and so all of those skills and techniques. With that went infrastructure of us being able to set up computer systems to track their cases, and so forth. So that was all something that I did for a year over there as a consultant, and with a team of investigators from the FBI, former FBI, Customs, and lawyers and so forth. It was a good year for me because I felt like I was back in the military. I was with soldiers in the mess halls and socializing with them all the time. I appreciated this volunteer military and the really high professional standards, the training they had, the dedication they had, and the sacrifice they were giving. They were not only regular people, but they were regular Army, regular Air Force and so forth, but they were also reservists, and both reservists and National Guard on their second and third tour, and I really respected that. I knew how long a year was, and they were doing it frequently. So I really felt like I was part of the war effort in different ways of setting up this new Iraqi government, and I felt good about it. So at the end of that year, I went back home and wound up continued to do the foreign teaching assignments, and that went on for 2 more years, and then I was invited back to Iraq to basically mentor the investigations of the trained up lawyers that I had done. So I did that for a year, and then that concluded my Iraq time after 2 tours there, 2 one-year tours. But when I was in Iraq, I wore the full, what the military calls battle rattle of helmet, body armor. I was carrying an M9 pistol and a M4 carbine. So I was certainly in the role, if you will, trying to be a part of what was going on there, and we were getting rocketed in the green zone and that type of thing.
What is the green zone?
Baghdad is divided up into 2 zones. One is green, which is considered to be safe. It's heavily fortified all the way around it. And then the red zone is everything else, where danger is daily, and that's where most of the citizens are. But the large cordon around Baghdad is where, that's the green zone, is where government officials lived of the Iraqi government, and our command headquarters, and where I worked and everything and trained up the Iraqi lawyers, all in the green zone. The military term of red and green has to do whether you're locked and loaded or you're unloaded. And so in the green zone, we carried weapons and everything, but we weren't allowed to keep them loaded until we moved out into the red zone. In that first year in Iraq, I found ways to do ministry. I'm an Episcopalian, and the companion of that in England is the Church of England, which is Anglican, and they're right outside of our gate of the green zone. In the red zone was St. George Anglican Church, which was run by a British priest and was servicing thousands of Iraqis for not only Christian but then Muslims, and helping them with medical and dental and food and everything. And a number of us would take leftover mess hall food from this huge green zone with lots of mess halls and all, and ferry out in the dead of night tons of food that was extra but very edible and nutritious for the church to distribute. And so that went on for my year. As I've said, I was a Boy Scout and a Boy Scout leader, and so I wound up getting together with a bunch of other Boy Scout and Girl Scout leaders from the States to partner with former Iraqi Scout leaders to reestablish the Boy Scout and the Girl Scout programs in Iraq so that they could be brought back online. Under Saddam Hussein, the scouting units then were converted by him to become like a Ba'ath Party youth corps. And so the national or the Worldwide Scouting Association decertified them as scouting units. And so we were working to bring that certification back online and reestablish them, which we did. And that was fun for me because I am a former Boy Scout summer camp counselor, and so we were able to bring in boys and girls separately over there and have swim lessons in the embassy pool and that kind of stuff, and do good things with the scouts there. And even had the National Scout, Girl Scouts, they send over thousands of boxes of cookies, Girl Scout cookies for sale by the Girl Scouts for the embassy people. And the Boy Scouts have a scout ranch out west called Philmont, and every year they turn over hundreds of tents and mess kits and backpacks, and they sent us a whole container full of equipment for the scouts there. So that was all stuff that we did totally separate from and our mission there, but it was fun. That time in Iraq I felt was almost a continuation of my Vietnam and earlier military time. Not only was I armed and in uniform when I was over there as a consultant, but then it kind of bolstered my connection to what was important to me about our military. I became involved a few years ago with the Honor Flight program here in Fairhope, and was invited to be a guardian escort for a World War II veteran and go on one of those round-trip flights. And if you're not familiar with them, they are literally a 20-hour marathon in which you meet at like 4 in the morning here in Mobile on a chartered aircraft, and all of these World War II veterans, many with oxygen tanks and walkers, were assisted by guardians and medical people and loaded up, and chartered flight, relaxed conditions. Everybody was military and flown to DC, greeted there. Congressmen would turn out and greet. There was a circuit of the various war memorials, not only the World War II for their service, but Korea, Vietnam, and so forth. Trips to the Capitol, congressman offices, and those old guys and gals hung in there, and back to the airplane and right back to Mobile. And
what a wonderful program.
Yep. About 7 years ago, I had the opportunity on one of my teaching courses to go to Vietnam again. And I presented the course that I was teaching in 4 different cities. In Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, and also in Da Nang. And those are 2 cities that I actually flew out of in South Vietnam before I left and on missions. and then two other cities, Hanoi and then up in Long Son, which is up on the Chinese-Vietnamese border. That was a very, very meaningful trip for me because I was able to see the huge changes in the country. And to back up a little bit, when I was there in 1966, 67, Saigon was probably the tallest building in town, was 5 stories, and that was it. And Da Nang, there was even a TV show I think called China Beach,
Yes.
but China or Da Nang was literally just beautiful beaches and fishing boats, small little scow fishing boats. And when I went back, the Saigon looked like New York City. Skyscrapers, all new construction, amazing. And Da Nang was, that China Beach looked like Miami Beach with high-rise condos, cruise terminals, cruise ships coming and going from Australia, China, the US, and other countries. Thriving country economically. And to back up a little, in 1995, President Clinton normalized relationships with Vietnam. And from when we left in 73 and when 75, when Vietnam fell to the communists, from 75 to 95, 20 years, Vietnam labored economically in rebuilding their war effort and everything just because of the communist and socialist economic systems. So for 20 years, they did almost little. And when we normalized relationships, immediately Vietnam started to take off and became and grew to be the economic powerhouse it is in the Pacific Rim today. And so they are a strong economic engine. They're a strong ally with us. And I often think today that if we were going over there to help the Vietnamese people in our war effort, this perhaps could have been a better way to do it, because they are really doing very well. They're still communist. They still have this kind of a hybrid socialist, capitalist economic system, but they're, it was a pleasure to be with them. And probably, I did attend there. I went to the museum in Ho Chi Minh City, which was, they call it the War Remembrance Museum, in which they talk about the American War. For them, it's the American War, not the Vietnam War. And everything in there is a picture from their perspective, and that's to be understood, and I very much understood that. But I also saw a lot of heavily documented things from our own government, extracts that were within the museum of our own government, of the amount of tonnage of bombs that we dropped in Vietnam, and which exceeded the Second World War in Europe, the amount of, in tonnage of all the defoliant chemicals we dropped on them, and then the results of the contamination of livestock, crops, people, genetic mutations, and everything that's hurting their entire medical system. And all of that information was from their own, but also U.S. sources. So that was very sobering and important for me to see. When I was in Hanoi, I went through the Hanoi Hilton and the museum and so forth to see that. The fourth city was up in Long Sun was very rural, and so it was much more of rice paddies and mountains and that type of thing. But I saw a lush country still, that this many years is still coming back from the war. My closest contact with the people of the country had to do with my courses and the teaching of the military, and they were.
You were teaching there.
These are the military officers that protect their borders all the way around, and their focus is border security and counterterrorism and who's crossing their borders. And so the courses that myself and our team were teaching had to do with that. These were all senior officers, majors, colonels, and they were all born after the war. They knew America as a trading partner, and we are, right even today, their largest trading partner. And so they see us that way. All my contact with them was very friendly, very respectful as an instructor. They love our sense of humor as Americans, and as we talked about things. We went to, in all 4 cities, we would go at night to the officers' clubs and talk about border security, war stories with them, and drink beer and relax. And there were more than one occasion in all of these different cities, like in Hanoi and so forth, that we'd be in an officer club in a conference room like this, and around the walls would be their national flags. There'd be the red flags with gold, either a star or a hammer and sickle, all around the room. And all I could think of to myself 50 years later is, who would have thunk, having been in the war. I never disclosed to the students that I'd been in the war. They really didn't care. But that was a very important, I wouldn't say cathartic, it was a affirming trip for me to see that what we were there to do, which was help the Vietnamese people, had happened, maybe not in the way that we thought it would. So.
You've had a very fascinating career that has had some consistent themes: duty, honor, country, from West Point all the way through to your ability to teach all these things and communicate so well with so many diverse people. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that my military service was in very formative years for me, ages 18 to 22. And it was the exposure in all those foreign places helped me realize the importance of the military to our national defense and our national posture in the world. And so it just has increased my respect for our people who now serve and have served, so that's always going to be there for me. I'd like to think that as a Christian, my faith walk has been greatly enhanced as I've seen God's work among people, and how, despite some of the things I've seen in the destruction and the poverty and so much around the world that is makes us grateful we're not there permanently, but it also has deepened my heart for those people. And so when I think about using our military great people to forcibly go into a geopolitical situation, I'm extremely hesitant and very guarded about that, because I think our political leaders should be only moving forward with military action when it is truly the last resort. Our military does its job very well, and very well means there's often collateral damage, civilians hurt, displaced people, and many unintended consequences, and that's what war is. And so I am extremely guarded about the use of military, and I would hope that our military is only used by our elected officials that way. So I'd like to think that my military time has made me a better husband, dad, and as a Christian, I know it does.
Well, Mr. McNamara, we thank you so much for your service, and we also thank you for being part of our Veterans History Collection program, and appreciate the time you spent with us today.
It was my pleasure, Kris. Thank you.